50 meters of stainless steel, floating in the Indian Ocean, intact, still transmitting telemetry. There is an image from 1969 you need to hold next to this one. A crater in the Kazakh steppe, where a nearly identical machine, 30 engines, identical lunar ambitions, the exact same mathematical nightmare, had just created one of the largest non-nuclear explosions in human history. The Soviet Union spent 11 years and billions of rubles trying to build what you are looking at right now. This is the story of two rockets, built 60 years apart, and why the one that survived in the Indian Ocean just fundamentally altered the modern space race in ways almost nobody is talking about yet.
Two, one.
These are not two different stories separated by time. They are the exact same story, told 6 decades apart by two ideological adversaries using opposite engineering philosophies. Everything that destroyed the Soviet N-1 program is the precise set of problems Starship has been methodically breaking apart, piece by piece, in full view of the public. And on July 24th, 2026, Flight 13 proved that the single hardest problem, the exact physics failure that broke the Soviet lunar program, has finally been solved. To understand why that splashdown in the Indian Ocean changes who controls the moon's south pole today, you have to go back to 1959, into a room filled with brilliant engineers and catastrophic political rivalries. In 1959, Sergei Coralev, the legendary chief designer behind Sputnik and Yuri Gagarin, began working on the ultimate challenge of his life: how to throw a human crew across 380,000 kilometers of void to the moon. The physics dictated the size. To pull a lunar payload out of Earth's gravity well, you needed unprecedented thrust. The American answer was brutal and direct. Build 5 giant engines. The F1. Each single nozzle producing 1.5 million pounds of thrust. Simple, symmetrical, monstrous. The Soviet Union couldn't do that. Soviet metallurgy and manufacturing in 1959 simply wasn't capable of controlling combustion stability in a chamber that massive. To make matters worse, Coralev was locked in a bitter personal feud with Valentin Glushko, the country's premier rocket engine designer. Glushko refused to build the engines Coralev needed, so Coralev did something desperate. He turned to Nikolai Kuznetsov, a man whose team designed jet engines for airplanes, but had never built a liquid-fuel rocket engine in their lives. Kuznetsov offered a solution that was elegant on paper, but a death trap in practice. Instead of 5 giant engines, build 30 smaller ones and pack them together into a tight grid. 30 engines, connected by miles of high-pressure plumbing, thousands of volatile valves, and thousands of sensors, all orchestrated by an analog computer called Cord. And here was the fatal flaw.
Because of our limited resources and capacity, we had to do the bulk of the development of the rocket stages during test space flights.
The Soviet Union did not have a test stand big enough to fire all 30 engines together on Earth. Not once. Every individual NK-15 engine was tested alone in a factory, But the complete cluster, the actual 30-engine monster that had to fly, was never fired simultaneously until the rocket was sitting on the pad, fully loaded with thousands of tons of volatile kerosene and liquid oxygen, with the ignition switch flipped. Every launch attempt was the first full systems test. NASA static-fired the entire Saturn V first stage on the ground in Mississippi. They broke things on the test stand so they wouldn't break them in the sky. The Soviets were gambling. And when the gamble failed, as it failed all 4 times the N-1 flew, the Soviet apparatus compounded the engineering failure with a systemic one. They classified everything. The crashes were erased. The launch pads were swept clean. The engineers were sworn to absolute secrecy. That secrecy meant that when an N-1 exploded, only a handful of senior officials were allowed to review the telemetry. The junior engineers designing the next iteration were forced to work from heavily redacted reports. They were ordered to fix problems they were forbidden to fully understand. The N-1 didn't just fail because 30 engines are hard to synchronize. It failed because a culture that outlaws visible failure makes it mathematically impossible to learn. July 24th, 2026. Starbase, Texas. 33 Raptor engines ignite. Not 30, 33. 8 days earlier, this exact vehicle had aborted at T-0 when 6 turbopumps showed abnormal pressure readings. SpaceX didn't hide it. They didn't classify it. They posted the sensor data publicly to X within 3 hours, swapped the hardware in broad daylight, and stepped back up to the pad. This is the central paradox of modern aerospace. SpaceX does not succeed despite their explosions. They succeed because of them. By pushing hardware until it disintegrates in the open, documenting every millisecond of structural failure, and analyzing it publicly, they buy data that computer simulations cannot provide. That difference in philosophy is why the N-1 sits at the bottom of a Kazakh crater, and why Flight 13 made history. Side note, if you want to see the complete, unredacted breakdown of N-1 launch attempts and the tragic fate of the engineers who built them, we put together a complete deep dive video linked down below. Make sure you're subscribed, because what Flight 13 achieved in its final minutes and how Beijing is reacting to it is where this space race turns into a geopolitical battleground. Now, back to the story. Flight 13 didn't just fly. It systematically dismantled 5 core engineering nightmares that killed the Soviet lunar dream. First, the cluster worked. On July 10th, SpaceX ground-tested all 33 Raptors in a full-duration static fire. On July 24th, those 33 engines burned continuously through max Q, the point of maximum aerodynamic pressure, guided by distributed flight computers that dynamically adjusted thrust in real time to compensate for micro-instabilities. What the Soviet analog computer Cord tried and failed to do with analog logic gates in 1969, modern electronics and ground validation solved in Texas. Second, they mastered hot staging under extreme dynamic load. Separating a giant booster from an upper stage is inherently violent. The N-1 never even survived long enough to attempt staging. Flight 13 ignited Ship 40's upper stage engines while still physically attached to Booster 20, blowing exhaust out through the vented interstage ring. When a minor roll torque flipped the vehicle 90 degrees off nominal, a moment that would have broken an N-1 in half, the flight software instantly executed a revised engine start sequence, firing 2 vacuum engines off-center to torque the ship back into alignment before completing separation. Third, it flew with real weight. The Soviet N-1 only ever carried dummy masses, dead weight meant to simulate a lunar lander. It was a developmental ghost that never generated operational utility. 16 minutes into Flight 13, Ship 40 opened its payload bay and deployed 20 next-generation Starlink V3 satellites into orbit. hardware now actively linking into a global commercial communications network. SpaceX converted a developmental test flight into an operational infrastructure mission.
And there you go. You can see our first Starlink V3 getting deployed out of Starship.
Fourth, the deep space relight. To execute a translunar injection, or land on the moon, a vehicle must be able to reignite its engines after drifting frozen in zero gravity. 40 minutes into the flight, high above Johannesburg, Ship 40 oriented itself into an anti-normal vector and fired a Raptor vacuum engine for 14 continuous seconds. It wasn't just a test of the spark igniters, it was a safety maneuver. By firing perpendicular to its orbit, SpaceX proved the engine could relight without generating space debris or risking an uncontrolled orbital decay over populated land masses. And finally, the re-entry and splashdown. When the second N1 fell back to Earth, it wiped out its own infrastructure. On July 24th, Ship 40 plummeted through the atmosphere at Mach 25. SpaceX had deliberately stripped heat shield tiles off key sections to stress test the bare stainless steel structure. The vehicle survived the plasma field, flipped vertically using its aft and forward body flaps, executed a landing burn, and settled gently into the Indian Ocean. It didn't explode. It didn't break apart. It floated, transmitting live video of seawater cooling its engine nozzles. Which brings us to the part of the flight SpaceX would rather you not focus on. Booster 20 did not survive. During its landing burn back toward the water, only 9 of the scheduled 13 engines ignited cleanly. 3 seconds later, 2 more experienced turbopump overspeed events and shut down automatically. The booster hit the Gulf of Mexico at velocity and disintegrated. In the Soviet era, a failure like this would have meant an immediate 6-month freeze, a secret tribunal, and a cover-up. SpaceX, however, broadcast the destruction live to millions. Within 24 hours, telemetry data showing the exact fuel line pressure drop that caused the engine freeze was published online. The booster destruction isn't a setback, it's the raw material for Flight 14. The Soviets hid their failures until the program ran out of political cover. SpaceX uses their failures to fuel an engineering process that iterates faster than bureaucracy can track. And that brings us to the real elephant in the room, because SpaceX isn't the only nation watching this footage. China is currently building the Long March 9, a massive, super heavy lift launch vehicle designed to put Chinese taikonauts on the moon's south pole before 2030. The first stage of the Long March 9 relies on a clustered engine configuration, solving the exact same problem Coralev faced in 1959 and Musk faced in 2019. How do you manage dozens of high-pressure liquid engines firing inches apart? For 10 years, China's state-owned aerospace contractors have monitored every single Starship test flight, every public failure report, every open-source telemetry stream. Every hot staging adjustment published by SpaceX gives Beijing a free, zero-risk blueprint of what works and what fails. SpaceX's greatest strength, its radical open development philosophy, has effectively de-risked the mathematical path to the moon for the Chinese space agency. The Soviets lost the space race because they could not learn from their own failures in time. China is winning ground in the modern space race by learning from America's failures, completely free of charge. The rocket the Soviets died trying to build is finally here. The machine is ready. But the central question of the 2026 space race remains unanswered. Who is moving fast enough? The lunar South Pole contains billions of tons of water ice, the oil of the solar system. Whoever lands there first sets the territorial, legal, and economic rules for the next century of human expansion. If this analysis gave you a perspective you haven't seen anywhere else, hit the like button and subscribe. Up next on the channel, inside the high-stakes legal fight over the lunar South Pole and the contested craters of Artemis. Thanks for watching. See you in the next story.